but I'm a quarter County Tyrone man because my grandfather was born in Donegal, and he's very proud of the fact that his mother's name was O'Neill, and he came to Larne with the Brown brothers who started a factory in Larne, a Larne weaving company. He was one of their first weavers. But he always addressed himself, or always spoke of himself as being a little gentleman from the County Tyrone. And I well remember him singing Tyrone Among the Bushes. So that's my pedigree, if you like. But it's a pleasure to be here, and I hope you'll enjoy what I have to say. At the going down of the sun, as you see here, it says, in the morning we will remember them. Now, people have thought of the first decade of the 20th century as being something of a golden age. But if you really read the history, it was far from that, because there was a lot going on internationally. There was a great naval war going on between Great Britain and Germany, and the Kaiser wanted to build his navy up so that it would be as powerful as the British Navy. And there was a lot going on in this country as well, of course. The Third Home Rule Bill was underway, and it looked as though it would become law in 1912. And with apologies to Charles Dickens, Tale of Three Cities. Three cities, of course, were Belfast, Dublin, and London. Now, in order to counteract this, in 1905, the Ulster Unionists formed the Ulster Unionist Council, and then they brought in as their leader Sir Edward Carson, who already was famous as I was going to say a QC, but a KC, and he had a lot of cases, of course, including one where a play was made of it called The Winslow Boy, and he defended a young fella who was accused of stealing a 5-shilling postal order, and he proved that the young fella had never done it. The young fellow was drummed out of the Navy, but he later joined the army and unfortunately lost his life, and his name is now on the memorial at the Menin Gate, a fellow called Archer Shee. So they elected Carson as their leader, and in 1912 they felt that they would have to do something because the Home Rule Bill was about to become law. The first two Home Rule Bills had been stopped by the Lords and by the Commons, but the Liberal government of the day under Asquith were dependent on the Irish party in Parliament for their majority, and so it looked as though it was going to become law. And in 1912 then there was the signing of the Ulster Covenant, based on the old Scottish Covenanter Covenant of the 17th century. And here we have Carson and some of the leaders signing it in the City Hall. But it was signed all around the countryside, and some of my relatives are here on it as well. My grandfather Adam Ritchie, my grandmother. Now, the Covenant, women weren't allowed to sign the Covenant because they hadn't the vote at this time. But what they did was they signed a declaration of support for their husbands and for their sons and so on. And almost half a million signed, one way or another. More women actually signed than men. Well, things progressed and still a bit unsettled. And in 1913, the UVF was formed, and also the Irish Volunteers. In 1914, on the 24th of April, my birthday, believe it or not, the Ulster gun running took place in Larne, when they ran in something like 20,000 rifles and almost 1.5 million rounds of ammunition. And it was distributed all around the province, including Bangor, Donaghadee. And one of the places it was distributed was this house, Dramaalis. It had been owned by Sir Hugh Smiley, but he had died in 1909, and his widow, the Dowager Lady Smiley, she allowed them to store the guns there. And not only that, they actually planned the gun running in the breakfast room of this. In 1930 it was taken over by the Sisters of the Cross and Passion, and because vocations had gone down, it's no longer a convent, but it's an exhibition centre, if you like. It's a place where people can come and have conferences, and they take great delight in showing you around and showing you the breakfast room where the Ulster gun running was planned. But anyway, it's just one of the ironies of life, if you like. And of course, further south, the Irish volunteers were drilling as well. Now there was 1,000 guns run in, not nearly as many as for the Ulster volunteers, but 1,000 guns were run in, a lot of them on Erskine Childers' yacht, the Asgard, and I don't know how many rounds of ammunition, but things were really hotting up, and it looked as though there could be civil war in Ireland when something else happened. In a faraway place called Sarajevo, a young man, Gavrilo Princip, who was a Serbian nationalist, the Black Hand group in Serbia, decided to take things into his own hands, as it were. They assassinated Franz Ferdinand, the heir apparent to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie. That was on the 28th of June 1914. The Austrians, of course, they demanded reparations from Serbia, and they laid down conditions that were almost impossible to fulfill. And the Germans fell in behind the Austrians. Then Russia fell in behind their fellow, the Serbs, who of course were of the same religion as the Russians. And so on the 4th of August, the whole thing kicked off. Britain once again found itself at war with Germany because Germany had invaded Belgium, and Britain went to war with Germany. Ireland was affected, of course, as well. These are just some of the posters that went up whenever the call to arms came. And you'll see this one in particular here. Just keep that in mind because we'll be talking about that later on. Remember Belgium. John Redmond, the leader of the Irish National Party, made a speech at Wooden Bridge in County Wicklow when he called for volunteers to go and fight in the war, because he reckoned that if Ireland had helped Britain at this time, Britain could not then refuse them home rule. Just some of the things he said, you know, he said, think of your brothers in the Connaught Rangers, the Munster Fusiliers, the Dublin Fusiliers and so on. Go and fight for Ireland. There were 3 divisions formed. The first of them was the 10th Irish Division. Here we see them going to the boat in Dublin. Then there was the 36th Ulster Division and the 16th Irish Division. The first of them that formed was, of course, the 10th Irish Division on the 24th of August 1914, but they all set off for war. Not everybody agreed, of course, and this man, who was born not too far from Larne, Owen McNeill, he was the leader of the Irish Volunteers at this time, and after Redmond made his speech, they became the Irish National Volunteers, and McNeill and his organisers, they called themselves the Irish Volunteers. This man, James Connolly, I have a lot of time for James Connolly because in 1913 he came to Larne. There was a big strike on the aluminium works, and he sought to help the workers. They were looking for something like a halfpenny an hour, and he tried to organise them, but as it so happened, they had to go back for almost worse conditions than they had before. And he said something to this effect: it was the first time he ever saw the clergymen of both sides coming together to beat the workers back to work. Now, he was a man, as I say, I had a lot of time for. And this is one of the posters, of course, that the Irish Volunteers, Owen McNeill and so on, he was the president. Safeguard your rights. They had no intention, of course, of joining Great Britain. They more or less felt that this would be betraying all they stood for as Irishmen. And so they resolved not to join them. Here are some of Connolly's men on the roof of Liberty Hall in Dublin, the Citizen Army. Now, as we know, in 1916 something kicked off. Funny enough, the same day as I was born, the 24th of April. Now, I wasn't born on that particular day, but some years afterwards. Everything seems to happen on the 24th of April. Easter Monday, the 24th of April 1916, the Easter Rising took place. Owen McNeill knew nothing about it, and when he heard about it, he tried to countermand the order, but it was too late. The rising took place, and we know that there was a lot of damage done in Dublin, but some men appeared on the steps of the GPO in Sackville Street, as it was called at that time, before it became O'Connell Street, and they proclaimed this: we place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, and so on. And this is the proclamation that they made before the whole battle kicked off on that particular week. But even before this, on the Western Front, the Battle of Verdun had started on the 21st of February. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the war. And one of the reasons being, it was fought in such a small, confined space. I mean, you can see the number of guns that were there. 1,240 the Germans had. And that's no more than about 10 miles long. And you can see it's only about 5-6 miles deep. It was very hilly, as some of us who have been there have seen that. And it was absolute carnage. I mean, so many were slaughtered on each side, and I'll show you the figures just in a moment or two. The French were getting it tight, and so they asked the British, could they possibly bring forward the offensive on the Somme, which was already planned. And the British agreed to bring their offensive forward, and so they brought it forward until the 1st of July 1916. These are the casualties that were done. You can see they're quite horrendous. And in fact, when you go there today, there's a great ossuary, and in that ossuary there are 45 rooms containing bones of Germans and French all together. They couldn't maybe agree on life, but they're there in death together. And when you look through the little windows, you can see these bones. And I've had the privilege of conducting a service in the chapel there at Duamont, the big ossuary. Terrible when you see it. But anyway, they brought forward the offensive on the Somme to relieve the pressure on the French. And this was the portion that was covered by the 36th Ulster Division. Either side of the River Ancre, and you can see it was pretty marshy there. And on the 1st of July, there had been a great barrage for a week when something like 1.5 million shells were fired at the German lines, and the officers assured the men, you'll just have to walk over and it'll be okay. The Germans won't even be there to oppose you. But of course, due to a number of circumstances, including the wrong shells, a lot of the wire wasn't cut. So the barrage stopped at 2 minutes before 7:30 on that morning. But the 36th Ulster Division, their officers had already moved them out into no man's land, halfway across. So when the whistles blew, they were up and over the German lines before the Germans could get their machine guns set up. They achieved all their objectives, including the Schwaben Redoubt, which was one of the most formidable places in the whole area of the Somme. But what happened was, on either side, because the divisions on either side hadn't attacked until 7:30, the Ulstermen were like an arrow pointing into the lines. Whenever the other men attacked, the Germans had time to get their machine guns up, and some of their dugouts were 50 feet deep. They had time to get their machine guns up, and they just mowed them down. One German said it was like cutting corn with a sickle. So the Ulstermen were left there. Whenever the other men, most of them were killed and wounded and dying, the Germans were able then to turn their guns inward on the Ulstermen, and they mowed them down. And so that night, they had to retreat, and all the objectives they had taken were lost. But you know, the Battle of the Somme didn't stop on the 1st of July. It went on for 4.5 months, finished on the 18th of November 1916. And In September, it was the 16th Irish Division's turn. On the 3rd of September, they took the fortified village of Guillemont, and I have some photographs, I should have brought them, but I have some photographs of the fortified village, and it was really fortified. It was a horrendous place to try and take, but they took it successfully on the 3rd of September. One of the men who led them was this man, Lieutenant Colonel Lennox Cunningham from Tobermore. Moneymore, sorry, I meant to say Moneymore, that's right, Moneymore. Now he had been a regular officer and he was on the retired list. I think he was half pay or something like that. And he helped to organise the UVF, would you believe, in Moneymore. And when the call came at the beginning of the war, although he didn't have to join up, he joined up again. And he led the Connaught Rangers, and he had led the Connaught Rangers before this. And they loved him. And about 500 of them actually came from West Belfast. They were staunch nationalists. But he walked up the main street, not much of a place it was, but he walked up the street that morning with his walking stick in one hand and his revolver in the other. He was killed, as were many others. But they took their objective successfully. And on the 9th of September, they attacked another fortified village of Gunchie. And this is where it becomes personal for me. My grandfather joined up when he was almost 40 years of age. His brother-in-law was a fellow called Tommy Brady, and he was also my grandfather's best friend. He was killed at Gunchie. My grandfather helped to bury him, but the shelling was so bad that the body was destroyed. And I'll show you something afterwards, but he had lost his best friend and he never really got over it. In fact, like many of the soldiers, he would never talk about the war. They had seen so many horrendous things. This is the casualty list for both the 36th and the 16th Irish Division. You can see that they're absolutely horrendous casualties when you think of the number of men that were involved. And should I say that on the left flank of the Ulster Division on the 1st of July, the Newfoundland Regiment started the first day with 810 men. And the next morning, when the roll call was called, there were only 61 men answered the roll call. So that is the extent of the carnage that these men had to face. Worse was to come. Heber and Passchendaele, just another name really for the Third Battle of Heber, but it was an awful place to be. Not always because of the shelling and so on, but because of the conditions. And indeed, Willy Robertson, who was the chief of the Imperial General Staff, when he went to visit them and he looked at the conditions, he said, "Did we really send men to fight in conditions like these?" Now, one of the reasons was, whenever the Germans invaded Belgium, the Belgians opened a lot of sluice gates and flooded the place, hoping to stop the Germans. And that, allied with the fact that the water table was very, very high, made for awful conditions. And one of the things that the men feared most was actually slipping off one of these duck boards here and falling into a shell hole with perhaps 60 pounds weight on their back. If they did that, there's no way they could be rescued because their mates had the same on their back. So this was one of the things that they feared most. As a man from North Antrim, member of the 36th Ulster Division, and this is Major William Redmond, brother of John Redmond, the leader of the Irish National Party. He was wounded and he was lying in the battlefield when John Meek came across him, and he endeavoured to drag him back to the lines. And Willy Redmond said to him, "Go back," gave him a direct order, "Leave me, go back to the lines." But he disobeyed the direct order and he managed to somehow drag this man back to the dressing station. But because of his age, he was in his 50s, either 54 or 57, I can't remember what it was, but because of his age, I'm beginning to feel old here. Anyway, because of his age, he succumbed to his wounds, perhaps because of pneumonia or something like that. But this man was awarded the military medal, and he's buried in a little cemetery, Derrykeegan Cemetery, outside Ballymoney. He didn't last all that long. He died, he had been wounded too, and he died in 1923. Still quite a young man. Willy Redmond was buried in the grounds of Lochray Convent, and the nuns looked after his grave, but then again the convent closed because there were no vocations, and so his grave today is tended by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. You'll know this man, I'm sure. He actually was a convinced Irishman, all for home rule, and then he was for Irish independence. And he sang a song like this: keep the home fires burning, though your hearts are yearning. Though the lads are far from home, they dream of home. There's a silver lining through the dark clouds shining. Turn the dark clouds inside out till the boys come home. His name, of course, was John Mccormick, later made a papal count in 1928. The song was quite quiet until the 21st of March 1918, when Operation Michael took place. Some people call it the Kaiserschlacht or the Kaiser's Battle, but the Germans infiltrated in through the lines on a very foggy morning, and some of the Ulstermen and some of the 16th Irish Division, for they were fighting again together in this section. When they looked behind them, the Germans were already a mile behind them in the lines. Many of them were captured, and one of them was this man here from Larne, John McNeill. And John McNeill was only 20 whenever he was captured. And as he was being led into the prisoner of war camp, he heard somebody shouting, "I see they got you, Nealer, anyway." And he looked, and it was this man, Frank McGoran. He was a member of a soldier in the 16th Irish Division. He was also from Larne, so they shared the same camp until the end of the war. This man won the military medal. He and another man, Billy Bergmeyer, you called him, they cleared 13 Germans out of a trench. They won the military medal. And this is my grandfather, Frank Kelly. A little bit more. So after the war, the memorials began to be erected, and I don't think there'll ever be a time when more war memorials will be erected. I pray that there won't be anyway. Just some of the ones that were erected. Most of them were of an obelisk shape. In other words, a square pole tapering to the top. This one's Ballyclare, and this one's in the city of Cork, and you can see that wreaths have been laid quite recently. Some of them, like here in Cookstown, a replica, I think, isn't it, Martin, of the one in London, yes.
Smaller.
Only a smaller, yes, but it's one step up. It's the only memorial I know with its own lighting system. So there you are, in Cookstown. Some of them took the form of Celtic crosses. This one you'll probably have seen at Hillsborough. This is the one here at behind the cathedral in Ypres, remembering the men of Munster who lost their lives. And this is the one in Castle Bellingham. Now you don't see it anymore because the motorway bypasses Castle Bellingham, but we'll be talking about them just in a minute or two. And of course the great memorial, and it's 20,000 tons in weight in Ypres. You know, when you go here, it really sobers you, the Menin Gate, because there are 54 or 55,000 names on that gate of men with no known grave. And when you go here, not too far away from me, This is the biggest Commonwealth war grave cemetery in the world. There are something like 11,000 graves. Many of them are unknown, and it just says on them, known unto God. Around the walls, there are 45,000 names of men with no known grave. They were the later names they couldn't put onto the Menard Gate. And one of them is this man here, Father William Doyle, MC. He sought to give succour to the men, no matter what their religious persuasion was on the battlefield. And he won the MC. Some people think he should have had the VC, but anyway, a brave man. And incidentally, some people think that a lot of the chaplains carried behind the lines. Well, I've been in the chaplaincy centre in Amport in Hampshire, and on the walls there are the names of more than 170 chaplains who have lost their lives trying to bring succour to the men on the battlefield. Some of the memorials, more unusual ones, some you may recognise. This is the one that was on Lansdowne Road in Dublin, now on the Aviva Stadium. And the other one, of course, is the one in the Kingspan Stadium in Belfast. Practically the whole of the Irish rugby team joined up. Many of them lost their lives. The great memorials on the summit itself, the first one to be built, of course, was the Ulster Tower in 1922. Then you had the Ginchie Cross, which was inaugurated in 1926. And then the Catlin Memorial in 1932 by the then Prince of Wales, Edward. Rum-loving crowd there now. The church at Gillimon, the Catholic Church at Gillimon. This is the 16th Division cross. It took the place of another cross, which we'll see in a minute. And every year we go there, we have a little service, and I've had the privilege of speaking at that service on no fewer than 12 occasions, because we remember everyone who lost their lives in the war, not just some. And when you go into that church, you'll find, by the way, this is my great uncle Tommy Brady, his name's on the Steeple Memorial. When you go into the church, you'll find the plate. It's maybe not all that clear, but in 2006, the mayor asked for benches for the church. And they asked if some of the Irish churches would provide them. And those benches were given by Old Park Presbyterian Church in Belfast. The plate's there to say that. This is a strange one, isn't it? Ballyclare Comrades Football Club. What's it got to do with the war? Well, the word Comrades would tell you it was founded in 1919. But before that, their first ground was called Messine Park, because they remembered the days when they fought side by side with their nationalist comrades in the 16th Irish Division. And by the way, not all those who were in the 16th Division were nationalists, but they fought side by side, and so they wanted to remember them, and that's why they named it Messine Park. In 1998, we know that the Round Tower at Messine was inaugurated by President Mary McAleese in the company of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and the King of the Belgians. And these give you an idea of the men who were killed. You have the 36th Ulster Division, the 16th Irish Division and the 10th Irish Division. Quite a number of men from a small island. And remember that the population then, I don't know why it was as great as it is now, but still a lot of men. The Great Window in the Guildhall in Derry Stroke, Londonderry, the 36th Ulster Division, the 10th and the 16th Irish Divisions. Why did they die? Well, there are a lot of reasons actually. And some of the memorials like this one in Larne, it just says in grateful memory of the men from Larne who fell in the Great War 1914-1918. And again in Cookstown here, the men who died gave their lives for freedom. But when you come to Ballyclare, it's different. It says they gave their lives for king and country. Now, not all of them would have given their lives for king and country, but when you come to the one at Castle Bellingham, I don't know how you can make it out. Pray for those of the three parishes of Kilsaran, Dromiskin and Tucker who died for Ireland in the great international war. This is echoes of what John Redmond said in September 1914. Now, when you come to court, there's quite a story. This is the Boer War Memorial, and after the Great War in Cork, there were two organisations. One was the British Legion, and the other was the Cork Independent Ex-Servicemen's Club. When it came to Armistice Day, they wouldn't march together, they refused to march together. And this went on for a number of years until in 1925 when they built the memorial in the South Mall in Cork. And then a bit of sense took over and the two organisations joined together to remember. But you'll notice what it says here in this: fighting for the freedom of small nations. You remember the poster earlier on, it said freedom of small nations, and this is why a lot of the Cork men fought. Their thinking was, well, Belgium's a small nation, Ireland's a small nation, and so we will go and help them. Now, there's a little story about the memorial in Cork. Whenever I was doing some research for this, I went into the tourist office in Cork and I said to the girl behind the counter, "Could you tell me where the First World War Memorial is?" To which she replied, "We don't have a First World War Memorial." And I said, "I'm sorry, but you do." "Oh no, we don't." So I didn't argue with her. I came out of the office, turned left, 60 yards down the road on the South Mall, there it was. So I took my photographs, I went straight back in, I asked for the girl, and she came and I said, "You said you didn't have a war memorial?" She said, "That's right, we don't." And I said, "Well, excuse me, but you do, there's a picture of it, and it's just down the road. Now, please get this onto your computer because a lot of people will be coming to see this memorial, and you're only going to be embarrassed." This man, quite a unique man, Tom Catlin, and at one stage he actually was the Nationalist MP for East Tyrone. He also organised the men of Tyrone, I think it was Monaghan and Catlin, to join the army in the First World War. Quite a witty man, and one day a general came to visit him, and he was unorthodox, Tom Catlin. He didn't take orders all that readily, but the general rather said to him, "Kettle, there's no room for two of us in this army." To which Kettle replied, "You will be missed, sir. I am sorry." You know, so this was Tom Kettle. He is remembered in St Stephen's Green. I'm sure, Foster, you have seen it.
Oh yes.
Yes, a number of times. He's remembered in St Stephen's Green, and this is his bust, of course. This is what he felt he joined up for. "Died not for flag, nor king, nor emperor, but for a dream born in a herdsman's shed, and for the secret scriptures of the poor." I think there he was speaking of the stable in Bethlehem. And this was one of his reasons for joining up. But he said, "You know, I'll be remembered as a so-and-so British officer, and those men who fought in the Easter Rising will be remembered as heroes." Bandon perhaps presents one of the most, how can I put it, complicated factors of all. On the left we have the memorial to the West Cork Brigade of the IRA, and the dates on it are 1916 to 1923, and that's quite significant because it shows that they fought not only against the British but against the pro-treaty forces in the Civil War. On the opposite end of the town you have a statue of Sean Hales. Sean Hales was Michael Collins' right-hand man, and he organised a force, and they landed at Skibbereen, and they drove what they call the irregulars, or the anti-treaty forces, back into Cork. They never forgave him for that, and in December 1922 he was assassinated in Dublin. So there you have both strands of the Civil War. And by the way, more people were executed in the Civil War than were executed fighting against the British. Sad reflection, but there it is. And then in 1998, the people of Bandon, they put up this memorial to the men of Bandon and surrounding districts who had fought, and those who died in the Great World Wars. Now, on the 11th of November 1927, this notice appeared in a lot of the newspapers. In the Phoenix Park, gathering of 80,000, including 18,000 ex-servicemen. And according to what I read in the paper, along the streets there were thousands of people, and they were all wearing poppies. They met at Phoenix Park at the great Wellington Monument, and this is the tallest obelisk in Europe, 200 feet high. They met here and they erected this Ritchie cross beside it. This is the one that was taken, the other cross took the place of this, the one we saw earlier. And they had their remembrance service there. 1927, that was the year after Eamon de Valera had founded Fianna Fáil. So this was almost 10 years after the war. And in the Doyle that year, I don't know whether it was any other year, but in the Doyle that year, many of the TDs wore the poppy, while others wore the Easter lily, remembering the rising in 1916. One of the most beautiful memorials of all is Island Bridge in Dublin, and there's a story behind that. When it came the end of the war, they wanted to raise something as a memorial to the men who had fought in the war. So they proposed to have a hostel, but the top brass in the British Army said, no, we can't have that because the ex-servicemen might infect the minds of the serving soldiers, and so that was scrubbed. Then they thought they would raise a memorial in Merrion Square, and Joe McBride, who was TD in the Doyle, I think it was Clonagale, he was a TD for, I can't remember just offhand now, but he said, oh no, we can't have that, because that would give a wrong impression as to the origins of the state. And so finally they shunted it out to Island Bridge, which is about 1.5 miles west of Dublin, on the south bank of the River Liffey. Just across there you have the boat houses of University College Dublin. Now it's about 20 acres. You have on either side Linen Hall Library in Belfast. If you go in and ask, if you have a relative, go in and ask and they'll bring it out and you can look at it. Now these gatehouses, the structures between them are supposed to represent the men carrying their comrades, their dead comrades. And just there you can see the Wellington Monument. I think that where it's positioned is quite good. These are some of the books, the illuminated books. They're really beautiful. That's my great uncle's name there. But 49,400 Irishmen, you might say, but there were only about 35,000 Irishmen killed in the British forces, and that's true. But a lot of these men served in the Anzac forces. They also served in the American forces and so on. So that's why you have 49,400 Irishmen. This is the stone, the war stone, and the cross of sacrifice. And around the cross, in Irish and in English, you have the commemoration of the 49,400 men who lost their lives. But just across there, you have this Kilmainham jail. And I think that that's quite good that Island Bridge is placed strategically between the British imperial power, if you like, in the form of the Wellington Monument, and also remembering the men who died in 1916, including James Connolly. A lot of them were executed here, and that's really what turned the Dublin population and the population of Ireland in general against the British, because of the executions. But I think it's very, very good that that has happened. And in Inishowen Peninsula, there's this memorial here to the 3 divisions that served: the Ulster Division and the 10th and the 16th Irish Divisions. So it's good that today people are prepared to remember. For a long time, especially in the south, there was almost like a national amnesia as to the men who had served in the war. Indeed, the joke in Dublin in the 1920s was that the GPO would need to have been 4 times greater to accommodate all the people who said they fought there in the 1916 Rising. That was a typical Dublin joke, of course. That's the way they operated. But just to give you an idea, I said earlier that not all of the men who served in either the 36th Ulster Division or the 16th Irish Division or in the 10th Irish Division, where Protestants are Catholics. I put this down: at least 88 Catholics from all over Ireland, including 42 from Ulster, were served in the 14th Young Citizen Volunteer Battalion of the Royal Irish Rifles. And we were in a tour in Belfast just recently. We visited Campbell College, we visited the city cemetery, we also visited Short Strand, and there we learned that there were 2 brothers from Short Strand, Catholics, named Rooney, and only one returned home. Peter Rooney was killed on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, the day when the 36th Ulster Division went over the top. He was only 20 years of age. Another man, Crumlin Road Irish speaker, Charles Blake, he died and he was only 21 years of age. And then in Armagh, there was a newly married Irish speaker, 18 years old, John McKee from Armagh. His wife Cecilia had inscribed on his gravestone, "On his soul, sweet Jesus, have mercy." So it shows that even during the war, there was a lot of coming and going, a lot of mixing. And I'm just glad that today, at least, we not only can agree to differ, but we can agree that these men who lost their lives in the First World War were no less Irishmen than those who lost their lives in the Eastern Rising. I close with almost this, you'll be pleased to hear, I'm sure. This is a stone that is placed on a mass grave in Langemarck Cemetery. Now, Langemarck Cemetery is the biggest German cemetery in Belgium, and when you go in, you have this, it's a grave, and it contains no less than 24,000 young Germans. Again, mothers, sons, husbands, brothers, and so on. It says on it, "Ich habe dich bei deinem Namen gerufen, du bist mein." And some of the boys said to me, "John, what is that?" And I looked at it for a while, and then I realised it's actually a verse out of the Old Testament. Isaiah chapter 43 and verse 1. It says this, "I have called you by name, you are mine." And you know, that's the same for all of us. God doesn't see Protestant and Catholic. He doesn't see where we hang our coats up or our hats up on a Sunday. He just sees those who know Him, who long to serve Him, and those who don't. And I just pray that each one of us might realise in our lives those words that Christ Himself said. He was asked about the great commandment, and He said, it's covered by this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul and strength, and your neighbour as yourself. Not either or, but both. You can't do one without the other. So I pray that perhaps in our own lives we might speed that day when swords will be broken into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. Thank you very much for listening.